Good morning, good morning. Being that this is the week of Pasha Yisrei, Mattan Torah, maybe the biggest event in all of history. Someone asked me the other day, what's the Chiddush of Chassidus and Mattan Torah, legabe how it's understood al pi nigla. So I think all Eden who are familiar with this musogim know that Mattan Torah was a big day. Everybody, it's not, you don't need Tafke Chassidus to know Mattan Torah changed things. But it's an interesting way to put it into context. How Chassidus adds, in the Neshama, adds a whole dimension that really transforms how we look at such a significant event. So I thought I'll just say a few words, collecting together the different Maimorim and Sichos that discuss this. Some of the ideas I'm sure you're familiar with, but nevertheless, putting it all together in that context. So, Pin Nigla, the language that you find in different Rishonim and Achreinim is usually in this context. Firstly, the concept of Mitzvah V'Eisa. That before Mattan Torah, we were not Mitzvah V'Eisa. And after Mattan Torah, it was Mitzvah V'Eisa. In other words, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, the Ovis, and the Mois and the Eden, or what would be called Eden before Mattan Torah, would not commanded to do, except Bris Milah was the only mitzvah that was Mitzvah V'Eisa. So that's one gather. And once it's Mitzvah V'Eisa, you have now the Eibishter's power, Mushba V'Emed B'Har Sinai, and halacha has all kinds of implications of something that you were commanded to do, not just optional. The second inyan is the idea of that the Eden became Am Yisrael. Kegershin is Gayer. That's why all the Hilchos Geiros we learn from Mattan Torah, most of them, because then it was a collective Giyur. Kekotten Shenelom, Gershin is Gayer, because before Mattan Torah, halachically, there was no such thing as Ayid Api Halacha. Whole sefer called the Derech Mitzvah, not from the Tzemach Tzedek, and Anigla sefer. I think it's also called Sefer Aprisha, I think. Aprisha's Drachim, something like that, where it's a whole collection of all the different deis about what did Avram have the din of a Yehudi, of a Yisrael, did Esav have a din, because it's not so pashut. When exactly did Avram become a Yisrael? He wasn't born. He was born to Terach and to his mother. So that's a whole discussion in halacha that there was no real inyans. There was no inyan of U'Miselim. There's no inyan of Eden. That whole Mahavdil ben Yisrael Amim didn't exist. Ata v'chartonim v'kol Amim. Ata is all a Yavona v'charte by Mattan Torah. So that's a whole other gather of Mattan Torah that turned Eden into an official Am Yisrael, which essentially also goes together with all the Midrashim that talk about the Chasanim, Chasanos, Mattan Torah, and the Mishnah and Tainis. Chasana between Eden and the Eibishter. Till then there was no Chasana. So even though there was a relationship, and a very deep relationship, Al Pi Nigla also, for example, you take the concept of, let's say, talk about mentioned Bris. So the Rambam writes clearly in Pirush Mishnayos in Chulin that when we Mekayim Mitzvahs Bris, it's not because Avram did it. We do it because it's a mitzvah Torah, by Mattan Torah. We say Kashem Shenichs Bebrisa Shel Avram Avinu, and we do associate it because B'Peil Avram did it. So of course we want to invoke that schus. But the kayach of Mitzvah V'Eisa and Bris is dafke Mattan Torah dika power. So even the mitzvahs that were done before get a whole nother dimension by Mattan Torah. And going back to Kotten Shenei L'Dami, so it's a whole Metzias, which is of course the reason why, one of the reasons we eat milchik on Shavuos, because they had to be tevel the kelim, etc., all due to that fact that they even had to go through these three things: Kabbalas mitzvahs, they went to the mikveh, the tefillah, and of course bris, that the Eden had to go through before Mattan Torah. So those are a few of the key elements of how it's understood. As you see, they're all really halachic hegdorim. That doesn't necessarily explain. It's just like when you learn Hilchos Shabbos, so you can learn all the lamites malachas, and all the details of the tefillas we say on Shabbos, the tefillah as in tefillah, prayers, the Suda Shabbos, Mitzvah Einik Shabbos, as I said, Lamatas Malachas, there's details and many, many, many details. But it does not necessarily tell us what is the deeper experience of it. That you need to look a lot deeper to find the answer to that. Same thing with Mattan Torah. So the halachic category is very clear up in Nigla. And there are real implications. We know that, for example, there's halachas that talk about bar mitzvah being similar to Mattan Torah in our personal lives. Before bar mitzvah, it was like more lifnei Mattan Torah, like chinuch. So we do things beside mitzvahs chinuch to train us. And by Mattan Torah, same thing by mitzvah, now it's mitzvah v'esa. So there's all kinds of dinim. Let's say a person is born, a person is born, but bar mitzvah is between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. So there's halachas and shaylas about that, because he wasn't, by Pesach Rishon, he was not mechuyev to do a korban Pesach. By Pesach Sheni, you have now. Is he mechuyev in Pesach Sheni? The Rebbe has a whole sikh on this. My point is there are many implications in this category of before and after Mattan Torah. What Primus HaTorah, what Chassidus comes to add, is not obviously nothing new in the very concept. Mattan Torah is still a historical event. But what it comes to explain is obviously what really changed. What happened that moment? But we read in this week's Parsha, on Shishi B'Sivan, when Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai. And it's interesting that when you look at Chassidus goes back to the actual original Psukim. Everything I said, for example, is maybe hinted to in the Psukim in Parsha Yisrei. But you don't see it beferish. You're not going to see anywhere the words Mitzvah v'Esi. You're not going to see anywhere Gegesh and Zgayet or other Mattan Torah Dika Chedushim. But for example, when you read Pasha Pshuta Shamikra, what happened by Mattan Torah? So the Eibishter said the Eden came b'Rish Chedesh b'Etzmayim b'Reim Rishon Shal Chedesh HaShlishi. They arrived at Har Sinai. Vayichin Sham Yisrael neged Har. Rashi says ki ish echad b'leiv echad. And then they're told to prepare. And the Shleish L'Simei Agbola. And then comes the big event. And it's really, frankly, when you read it, it's almost like a mystical event. There's a light, there's sounds, right? The kelis and vrakim, and with all kinds of different so-called experiences, like fireworks show, so to speak, but that idea. And then came, of course, the moment Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai, and Moshe went up, and the Eibishter said, Aseres HaDibros. That's like and you see right away that it's a very spiritual moment, basically. So you don't have to be, even without any Pashatlach, Pshat, it's a spiritual moment. So what actually happened? And what does this mean, Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai? I remember I was once, it was years ago, I was asked to give a drasha. It was Shavuos. Went to one of the shuls on the Talucha. So they gave me one of these big shuls that was a very big Litvish Elam, very Bali Nigla Dike Eden. And so I asked the question, I said, how does you explain Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai? And I turned to the Elam, a lot of Talmid Chacham. What does it mean? Where did the Eibishter come from? Where was he before the Vayered? Where was he? In the sky? On a cloud? On a planet? What's this Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai? We know Ein Eid Movadeh. And the Eibishter is everywhere. So what happened exactly? Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai. Mainly you could say, Moshe, okay, we perceive Ma'ila Mata a certain way, so we have to elevate ourselves. But what exactly is this Vayered Har Sinai? And went through, I remember a few people commented. This one brought the Medrash that said that Ein HaShechina Yered Ad Lamata Masar Tvachim, Lamayla Masar Tvachim. They brought my Mordech Chazal, but didn't really answer the question. It just said different issues that in Nigla and Midrashim talk about Dargis and so on. But obviously, someone who's not learned Chassidus or Primus HaTorah and doesn't understand the idea of Ruchnis Dikamokim and thinks of everything in Gashmis Dikamokim is going to have a problem with Vayered. So you have to right away say Dibra Torah B'Lashon B'nei Adam. It's not Begashmis. The Eibishter came down like he was on the 5th floor and now he came down to the 1st floor. You have to understand it in a Ruchnisdik way. Just like it says Erdana. by the Havdil, by Zdaim. The Eibishter came down, Eredana, to hear the Haktzah Kosa, the cry of the suffering people in Zdaim. What's Eredana? So there's a whole maimer in Torah in Vayera, where it explains what means Eredana, which is essentially the same idea. And the answer is that, of course, they need Malvade. That's not a B'chlal Shayla. The question is, how much does the Eibishter relate to us? Because you could have, like the difference Chassidus explained between Yodua and Yudeya. Yudeya, to know something, if you want to know what's going on right here in this room, in this koil right now, you have to walk into the room here. You can't, I know there's video cameras and stuff like that, but it's the same idea. But you have to go and engage and go to the Mokim to know what's happening. By the Eibishter, there's the concept of Yodua. He doesn't have to be there, so to speak, like we're here. It's known to him. So the concept of Yerida is essentially how much is Slapshus, is Elikus. What we know the Lashon, the difference in Sevav Kalam and a Mamala Kalam. Sevav doesn't mean Makif, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, around, surrounds. It means it's removed, it's beyond, it's Behelim. Begili, so when we say, for example, the Osel Migdash v'Shachanti b'Seicham, and before that, the Shechinah is not on earth. The Eibishter is not here. So the answer is, here's a place where it's begili and it manifests in a very practical way. Whether we physically see it, that's our chsad, that we may not see that so-called vayered. So essentially, Mattan Torah was a shift that happened, and here's what Chassidus brings, the famous medrash, and why it's such a fundamental medrash. Again, this medrash is I've asked people who have not learned Chassidus, this medrash, many people say it's a moshel, but by Chassidus we all know such a Seizdike medrash. And the Rebbe especially, this is the medrash, probably the biggest medrash the Rebbe brings regarding Mattan Torah, the Gzeira. That ad Mattan Torah, there was a Gzeira, el yenim le'yorda lamata, and tachtenim yalu lamayla. And the medrash even brings a moshel, that there was the country called Remi, and the other country called Surya. And one is, of course, more north, and the other is south. So it was a Gzeira, which is interesting moshel in general. The moshel is not so much explained, I think, in the Maimorim, the Rebbe Sichos. I don't think I ever saw the Rebbe explain the moshel. Maybe he did, I don't remember, I'm not sure. But al kaponim, so yenim le'yorda lamata, which means ruchni is hashamayim shamayim la'Hashem, va'orez nitl lebnei adam, which makes sense. That means ruchni belongs in the higher world, and gashmi belongs in the lower world. Chaz v'shalom, that doesn't mean duality, that there's still Hashem echad, even before Mattan Torah. But from our point of view, there's a split, there's a schism, a gzeira, and then by Mattan Torah, the bitla gzeira is the lashon. That al yenim yorda lamata, tachtem yal lamayla, b'lashon ha nigla, which I should have mentioned before, but I'll use it now, that now you can take a gashmizdika object and turn it into a cheftra shel kedusha. Before Mattan Torah, that was not possible. Even the Ovis could not do that, except again, bris. That's why Simno Yatcha Tachas Yerechi, even though the Chayr not a tzniyazdika thing, because it was the only Nekitas Chayfetz that had Kedusha was the bris. But everything else, because there was the Gzeira, was not Gashmis, remain Gashmis, Ruchnis, remain Ruchnis. That didn't mean you can't use a Gashmizdika thing, L'Shem Shamayim, but you didn't transform a physical object. The concept of taking a klaf, literally a hide of an animal, Eir HaBehema, and turning it into a klaf, into parchment, that then you can be Mekadosh for Stam, for Sefer Torah, Tefillin, and Mezuzah, didn't exist. Beruchnius, it existed. But Begashmi is not. That's the Bitla Gzeira. So that explains that the Mitzvah V'Esa is not just the Eibishter now, Al Pei Halacha, we're Mitzvah, and before we were not Mitzvah. That gives the power to actually transform this world, which in different words means to reveal the Lukus in Gashmi, in the Geshem. And when you reveal the Lukus in Geshem, you make the Geshem into Ruach, into Chemer, into Tzura, they become one, forever and ever. Yeah, difference between Tashmish Kedusha, Tashmish Mitzvah, but bottom line is, Sefer Torah, Tefillin, Mezuzah, you cannot throw out. If it becomes puzzle, or rubbed out, or you can't use it anymore, you have to bury it. Forever, forever holy. So Mattan Torah changed the world in that sense. Gave us the power to transform. You look in Perek Lamed Vav in Tanya, The Rebbe says it very clear and brings it even stronger. He says, that the Benigla Kfed Hashem V'Rokol Bosa Yachdov of the Osilove, Ayin B'Ayin Yiro, that Elokus will be revealed Dire B'Tachtenim, we have Me'enza by Mattan Torah. Why is it Me'en? Because by Mattan Torah was the Fishah. It gave us the power to transform, but Mattan Torah is still not the Nesuyin, it's still not the Geula Amitis V'Ashlema. But the Kayach came from Mattan Torah, which is what explains why Chassidus brings that Mattan Torah Vet Nishzai No Chamol. Lo Ye'ida Pa Mattan Torah. It's an interesting expression in some Maimorim. Even though we say Lo Silove Torah Chadosh Miti Teitzei and all the different things and the new, nevertheless Mattan Torah only once. Because all the Kayachas needed and all the Torah that would ever be revealed is all Nichol Mattan Torah. It says Torah Chadosha, so the Rebbe has Biyurim what that means exactly. Obviously there can be new Giluyim and new Hamshachas, it's all coming from Ein Sof. But overall, Mattan Torah gave the Kayach. So today, right now, right here, that we can go out into the material world and not just bring Elokus there, but change the material world, transform it. That's from the Kayach of Mattan Torah. Now that's not a small little detail. That changes everything. When I gave that talk there, in the Litva Shul, and I explained this, I said this may explain why some of you may have difficulty with the Rebbe's approach of sending shluchim and sending his talmidim everywhere in the world to go and turn into a mokum Torah. Because b'chlal, the approach of, let's call it the more Litvish approach, is to stay in your community and build yeshivas and kelim and limudat Torah, kiyum mitzvahs, but more or less insulate yourself. And one of the reasons is because this world is a nesayin, and al taviyenu l'dei nesayin, you don't go out into a world that can be dangerous. Kol hadrachim b'cheskes sakon. However, if you really understood what Mattan Torah accomplished, that Mattan Torah actually softened the world, meaning it changed the Gashmis Ha'elam. The Eibishter created the world. So it's true, it still says they're Nisyanis. No one's suggesting this world is not Nisyanis. And frankly, Nisyanis, even if you're living in an insulated community too, especially today with technology. So the point is that Mattan Torah actually prepared the world that we could be mezachach. So when you know that, so it's not just a matter of mitzvah ve'esa. When you know that, that actually makes the world a keli. Now we have to do the work. And again, it still doesn't mean that there's no Yetzer Hara, it doesn't mean there's no Nefesh Habam, it doesn't mean there's no Nisyanis and challenges. But the potential of changing the world. Now I remember a Rav came over to me afterwards, he said he never heard it explained that way. He was very, very nispal from that. I said, yeah, that's exactly when you learn Chassidus, understand what Mattan Torah accomplished, it has a nafkamina lepel today. It means the world really is not a menagit telekuz be'etzem. The same Alter Rebbe says that the world is tachtenim, tachten shen, tachten lamatim imenu, cheshach kofle mechupel, moli klippers v'sitra achre, Hashem gave him bei. I mean, it's pretty heavy l'shenis. Kol maisim is koshim v'roim, to the point that the world says aniva afsied. That's correct because elikus is behela. But peil mamish, in that helam lies the koyach eliki as well. The helam itself comes from atzmus, the koyach hatzimtzum, and the whole world is essentially potentially mukhshir to do mitzvahs with and transform and turn it into chefzel shel kedusha. Now, just to drive the point home, this is not a small chiddush in many ways, because even philosophically, you probably know that the Mekubalim themselves have disagreements of how much the world itself can be transformed. Like for example, the shit of Tzimtzum Kipshutei, and we're talking now, like the Rebbe explains, that's coming from Gdei Yisrael, starting from the Mishnah Chassidim, Emmanuel Cheireki, and then of course the others. They did not say Tzimtzum Kipshutei because Chaz v'Shalom, they felt the Eibishter is not in this world. It was Mitzad Koved Hashem, Mitzad Gadlus Hashem. They felt that the Eibishter, how could he be found in Klippus and Sitrachra? So they gave the moshel of a melech looking into Beis HaKisei. So he's not in there, but he looks through the window. So in other words, the hashgach of the Eibishter is there, but not, the Eibishter himself manifest. The Alter Rebbe, of course, is shale that, as the Rebbe explains, because he was Makabel otherwise. But their point was that, yes, there is Elikus everywhere, but you cannot transform every part of this world into Elikus. You have to be shale in many things. That's what Simchas Kipshuti is, that the way you make Gili Elikus is like Al Derech. Once heard from Melech Mashpia, Melech Tzvibel, he said that the Simchas Kipshuti looks at the whole world like we look at Shalosh Klipos Atmeis, which means our eifin of Aveda with it is through Tchiyah, through avoiding it. Leisasa. That's also a bir. Hayeshiv v'lei over Aveda is kilo asa mitzvah. That's also something. You're refraining from going there. But to be mavaded be'eifin chiyuvi, no. I don't know where he got, but he once told me that may be one of the ways to explain the nafkamina. But the Alter Rebbe says Simchas was nishki pshuti, and he was makabel like that. That means that we can go, again, not shalosh klipos atmeis chas v'shalom there in Nachanami. There's no bir be'eifin chiyuvi unless through tshuva, la'achar ha'maisa. But l'chatchila not. But the rest of the world is the shus, and therefore, even though the shus can be used, the shvishav for shalosh klipos atmeis, the Alter Rebbe himself explains that, but that's not a reason to avoid it. The reason is to engage with it and transform it. So you see that the bir apnimi, Chassidus, and Mattan Torah changes the way you look at the world. So it's not just semantics. It adds that whole other dimension. I want to say one more thing before we conclude. The Rebbe also brings that it's not just for Eden. The Rambam Sef Perek Ches in Hilchos Malachim says that the mitzvah is also lokuf, and not stam, but because it was given by Mattan Torah. In other words, Mattan Torah also affects the whole world. So that just adds another dimension of what I'm saying here, that it's about not just about Eden doing mitzvahs in the world, it's also inspiring and to transform the world as well. And the Lashon of the Alter Rebbe, me'ein zeh b'mahaya b'Mattan Torah, which means the shlemus of it is l'asad lavi. So it also adds how we understand Mashiach. Again, Mashiach again is for most, it's an abstract idea. One day Mashiach is going to come, and the whole world will be perfect. But that's not the case. Mashiach is a totally masenu v'avdesenu, and Mattan Torah gave us the power to transform the world, and when that's finished, that's what Mashiach and Geula is. Okay, so I hope this was Mu'at Machzor Kamaruba, and everyone have a good day.